the Curious Kid Podcast Season 7 finale.
It's amazing to think that we started this podcast 3.5 years ago.
We recently went back and listened to one of our older episodes, and we were shocked to hear how different it sounded when we first started.
I was just 4 years old when we recorded the first few episodes.
If you go back and listen to episodes from a few years ago, we both sounded a bit different, especially you.
I had a lateral lisp, so my S's sounded different.
Well, it's certainly not unusual for someone to sound different at 8 years old than they did at 4. But you did also correct your lateral lisp since we started the podcast. What's a lateral lisp? When a person with a lateral lisp speaks and they try to make the S sound that the letter S makes in words like snake, it doesn't sound quite right because air is released over the sides of the tongue. So the letter S sounds more like a lateral lisp is pretty common in kids.
I took speech classes for a few years and I was able to work on my lateral lisp. That's one of the reasons I sound so different today.
You sounded adorable then, and you still sound adorable today.
We also have a lot more confidence now than we did when we first started the podcast.
You're definitely right about that. When we first started the podcast, everything was so new for us. Researching, writing, recording, editing, and all of the other things that go into the podcast. It was a new journey that we started together so we could learn all sorts of interesting things.
And over the years, all of you have joined us on our journey, giving us the confidence to continue.
We have so many people to thank because Season 7 has been an incredible one for Curious Kid Podcast. It's amazing to think about all of the wonderful things that have happened over the last 6 months.
We reached 1 million downloads on November 6th.
Reaching the 1 million download milestone made us feel so special. Whether this is the first episode you've listened to or you've listened to them all, thank you so much for all you've done to support the podcast.
We helped donate hundreds of dollars to a wonderful charity for the Thanksgiving holiday called Reach Out and Read.
The folks at Reach Out and Read do great work, and we were so happy helping them with their mission of inspiring kids to read by providing kids, many of them without any books at home, with age-appropriate books. It was also so heartwarming to get donations from many of our listeners for Reach Out and Read.
We were also featured in South Jersey Magazine. This one was crazy because we had no idea we were going to be in the magazine. My Grammy was flipping through the magazine one day and saw a picture of me. It was such an amazing surprise.
And as if that wasn't crazy enough, they did a segment on Curious Kid Podcast for 6 ABC News. The segment aired on ABC for all homes in the Philadelphia market. It was an incredibly fun experience.
For those of you that didn't get a chance to see it, we've provided a link in the episode notes, so check it out.
It was the thrill of a lifetime to have the one and only legendary news anchor Jim Gardner introduce a segment on the Curious Kid Podcast.
We also appeared in some other podcasts. I said a few words about the Jersey Devil for a spooky podcast for kids called Unspookable.
We also contributed to a few episodes of the 10 News podcast. In one of our segments, we discussed the possibility that a ninth planet exists. When I was a kid, there was a ninth planet, Pluto.
Then it was kicked out of the Planet Club.
Sorry, Pluto. Well, now scientists think there might actually be a ninth planet. You can hear all about it in the 10 News.
Not only did we appear in other podcasts, but amazing guests appeared in our podcast this season.
Laquan helped us get curious about soccer. Steve helped us get curious about coding. Ryan helped us get curious about ears. Rachel and Leslie helped us get curious about carnivorous plants. Julia helped us get curious about horses. And Sean helped us get curious about asteroids.
If your mommy or daddy or anyone else you know would be a great guest for the podcast, send an email over to us at CuriousKidPodcast@gmail.com. We are looking for guests for season number 8 and beyond.
We've received great feedback about many of our episodes, but lots of our favorites and our listeners' favorites are our special guest episodes. We have some great guests lined up for upcoming episodes, but we're always looking for more.
There are so many people to thank this season.
Reach out and read for the wonderful work they do. South Jersey Magazine and ABC News for recognizing the podcast. Unspookable and the 10 News for letting us contribute to their podcasts. All of our wonderful episode guests, but more than anything else, we want to thank you, our incredible listeners.
We do this for you. Thank you for everything you do to inspire us to make this podcast for you.
If you just listen to the podcast, we are so grateful. But so many of our listeners have found special ways to show their love for Curious Kid Podcast, sending us emails, leaving us reviews, following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, supporting us on Patreon, or letting your friends know about Curious Kid Podcast.
Whatever you've done to show us love, we are so very thankful.
You've helped us create a beautiful family of curious kids and grown-ups with a love for learning all sorts of super interesting things. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
We have some special things to do in this episode. At the very end of the episode, we are going to share our favorite episodes and facts from Season 7. And then we are going to tell you the first 8 topics we are going to cover in Season 8.
But before we do that, we have something very important to share with you.
We've received lots of emails asking us to get curious about the war that is currently taking place in Ukraine.
While those emails were coming in, we discovered that our friends over at the kids' news podcast Newsy Pooloozi had a fantastic episode that breaks down the war in Ukraine, and they did such a fantastic job explaining it, we wanted to share it with you. Newsy Pooloozi is hosted by the super talented mommy-daughter team of Lindy and Leela. We are going to share part of their episode on the war in Ukraine right now. One quick note before we play it. Their episode on the war came out several weeks ago, before Russia invaded Ukraine. If you want to hear the full episode, we've provided a link to the very informative episode in our episode notes. Here are our podcast pals from Newsy Pooloozi explaining the war in Ukraine.
Let's get on with the basics. Do you know where the country of Ukraine is?
Somewhere next to Russia. No, I mean Europe.
Actually, both. And right there lies the problem.
Huh?
Yeah, like so many places, its geography is everything.
Okay.
It's life, Leela. Okay, you want to talk cats? All right, let's talk cats. You look after some of the neighborhood strays, right?
Yep.
Some hang out on the left side of the house and some on the other side, right?
Yep, they're 2 different families, and they don't always get along either.
Yeah, exactly. But I want to know, which do you love more?
Mama, I could not possibly choose.
I know, it's hard, right? You have ties with both sides.
Yeah?
Well, so does Ukraine. For decades, it was linked to the Russian Empire, and then it was part of the Soviet Union, which is...
That was a group of communist countries ruled by Russia. Most of the last century, right?
Well, in practical terms, yes, though technically it stood for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, but it was ruled by the Communist Party based in Moscow, Russia. So you're right. And communism is?
When the government owns everything.
Right. So when the USSR broke up in 1991, many of the countries started to find they had more in common with the free markets of Europe.
Oh, like when the cats on the left had kittens, and I started spending more time with them.
Yep, they were prospering, and you wanted to be a part of that. And the cats on the right had started to become a little sullen and...
A little grouchy, jealous, and aggressive, actually.
Maybe they were missing you and the amount of food and resources you used to give them.
Totally.
Well, that's kind of what's happening in Ukraine. They were part of the Russian Empire and the USSR, but kind of favor Europe now and want to join a club called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which includes most of Western Europe, the US, and Canada.
That doesn't sound like a very fun club to me.
It's not. It's a defensive club of armies, what's called a military alliance.
Is Russia part of it?
No, ma'am. In fact, NATO was formed in 1949 specifically to provide protection against the USSR.
Dun, dun, dun! The plot thickens. No wonder Russia's so mad at Ukraine. Then again, Ukraine is a free country, right? They should be able to do what they want.
Yep, but some people in Ukraine do have old ties with Russia, so...
The country's pulled in both directions?
A little bit. Mostly Ukraine is scared Russia is going to invade, like they did 8 years ago when they took over a region called Crimea.
What? And now they want to take over all of Ukraine?
Well, Russia says no, but right now there are well over 100,000 soldiers, along with helicopters and tanks, lined up on its border with Ukraine.
That's kind of bullyish behavior.
Big time. That's why you keep hearing about it in the news. Everyone is wondering what's going to happen next. People are so worried that if Russia does invade, those NATO countries, like the US, might decide to join in the fight.
What? That would be silly. Why would they want war?
Well, they don't, but they also don't want a big country thinking it can overtake a smaller one.
We want to thank Newsy Pooloozi so much for putting that together. It helps so many people like myself understand what is happening in Ukraine. Our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine during these very hard times.
Well said, Olivia. Now there is something that Olivia and I have done in every season finale since the first one, and we want to keep that tradition going.
We are going to tell you what our favorite episodes and facts were for Season 7.
My favorite episode was Curious About Earth. We learned so many interesting facts about the beautiful planet we all call home in that episode.
My favorite episode was Curious About Glow in the Dark. The science behind things that glow in the dark is so interesting. I've made glow in the dark slime before, and it was so much fun.
That was another great episode. My favorite fact from this season was in our episode on carnivorous plants. With carnivorous plants that have snap traps, they are able to count how many times a bug moves in their leaves. When a bug touches one of the tiny hairs on the inside of a leaf, the plant knows it. Then when another hair is touched, it triggers the trap to close, trapping the bug inside. It's not until 5 hairs are touched that the plant starts digestion. In a sense, plants with snap traps are able to count.
My favorite fact from this season was in our episode on soccer. In the early days of soccer, players kicked the ball but also punched the ball. The games were very, very violent, and players often got seriously hurt.
That's another interesting fact. We learned so much this season. I can't wait to learn so much more in Season 8. Here are the first 8 topics we are going to cover in Season 8.
We are going to learn about monster trucks, Greek mythology, snails, mushrooms, guitars, goosebumps, owls, and crystals, and so much more in Season 8.
And you won't have to wait for Season 8. Season 8 gets started next Sunday, April 3rd. We don't take breaks. New episodes released each and every Sunday for 3.5 years. And we don't plan on breaking that streak anytime soon. Join us next week when we will get curious about monster trucks for listeners in Tasmania, Australia, and Temple, Texas. As always, thank you so much for listening and getting curious with us.
This country was built on a distinctly American work ethic. But today, work is in trouble. We've outsourced most of our manufacturing to other countries. And with that, we sent away good jobs and diminished our capability to make things. American Giant is a clothing company that's pushing back against this tide. They make a variety of high-quality clothing and activewear, like sweatshirts, jeans, dresses, jackets, and so much more. All made right here in the USA, from growing the cotton to adding the final touches. So when you buy American Giant, you create jobs for seamsters, cutters, and factory workers in towns and cities across the United States. And it's about more than an income. Jobs bring pride, purpose. They stitch people together. If all that sounds good to you, visit American-Giant.com and get 20% off your first order when you use code STAPLE20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com with promo code STAPLE20.